Hello, today I want to pay a tribute to the Sony A7r. This has been my camera for the last 4 years and is being kind of misunderstood by a lot of people as not the most popular camera in the world. So let me explain why I think this is actually underrated and how good this camera actually is. So let me explain my purchasing decision, why I bought this in the first place. So at the time I was using a Nikon D90 and it was a great camera, but the one problem was I found it was a little bit too big. So I wanted something a little bit more compact. And I remember at the time it was Olympus that came out with the OMD EM1. And it was on the rumor sites for a while, and I decided to put a pre-order in. And about a week after it was announced, Sony announced their A7R, which was a full-frame mirrorless camera about the same size as the Olympus. And rather downgrading the sensor size, I thought, you know what, just upgrade the sensor. So in terms of when you compare the Olympus with this Sony, yeah, the Olympus you could say is better in some ways. It's a better sort of like a journalistic camera, you could say, whereas this is more like an old school camera, and in more ways than one. So let me just explain what I'm sort of talking about. So let's get this into the frame here. Okay, this is the Nikon FM2, and this is about the size of camera that was typical from the 1970s through to, well, the digital revolution, really. Like, a lot of people had this type of camera. And if you have a look at the Sony and the Nikon side by side, they're very, very similar in terms of size and shape. Okay, so the thickness is about the same. It's got the same frontal area. The Sony is a little bit taller, but the size is really comparable. And this is what makes it portable. Okay, so no longer am I embarrassed to take it to a restaurant. I can take it whenever I want, and this is what I need a camera for. I'm not happy using my phone for everything. I want to use my camera to get the best possible image quality. And for that, the Sony is spot on. Speaking of image quality, currently, if you look at the Dxo Mark Scores, it ranks in at number 10 with a score of 95. Now, this includes two medium format cameras, the Hasselblad and the Pentax 645. So if you exclude that, out of all the full frame cameras, it's actually number 8 in terms of like image quality. It's ahead of the Sony A9 and it's ahead of the Canon 5D Mark IV. So even still, 4 years down the line, the Sony still produces top-notch image quality. Now, yes, you are going to have people that say it suffers from shutter shock and it's slow to focus. But really, what you have to imagine this camera is a digital version of this Nikon. And what I mean by this Nikon is completely mechanical. Like it requires a battery for the light meter, but besides that, the shutter speed is manual, the aperture is manual, the focus is manual. And as a result, what happens is you take your time, it really slows you down. The Sony is very similar. You can't rely on these like fast burst speeds, but what it gives you is fantastic image quality when you slow right down. And for me, at the time, that was important. I wasn't shooting sports. I was shooting pictures of my friends, capturing memories, this kind of thing. And for that, this Sony, I'm telling you, it's something else. Now, let's just get this out of the way. Yes, it is a small body and currently has a small lens on. And if you change it to a larger lens, this is what happens. Okay, let's get this open. And this is another gripe that a lot of haters of the Sony system, remember when it was out, it divided opinion. Some people loved it, some people utterly hated it, and this was another point of contention. Okay, it's so big it can't even fit in the screen. Let's just move this up. There we are, you can see that now. Okay. It's a small camera with a big screen, big lens even. And people had a problem with that. The trouble is, this was never really an issue. It's always been like this, even with the cameras from the 70s. And let me show you this Nikon as an example. Okay, let me take this out. Okay. Now, this is the Nikon with an 80 to 200 millimeter lens. And as you can see, it's also big. If the angry photographer saw that, he would choke on his cheeseburger because it's a small body with a big lens. You can't cheat the laws of physics, right? It's one of those things that you needed to kind of research before you bought the camera in the first place. If you knew this going in, you know, it's not a problem. However, if you didn't know it and you thought the whole system would be tiny and small, yes, it would be a little bit of a shock, but that comes down to more ignorance rather than like any fault of the manufacturer. I think Sony did a very good job because it's easy to make a small camera big, but you can't make a big camera small. Another way that this is a modern day throwback to the film era are the beautiful Zeiss Loxia lenses available. Now these are manual focus with a manual aperture ring, and it's 100% mechanical in that there's none of this fly-by-wire focusing nonsense. It's just purely mechanical, and it's such a tactile joy to use. It's something you don't get in a lot of cameras. Speaking about a joy to use, a lot of people complain about the menu settings. Yeah, with Sony, you need to spend a little bit of time to set up the camera how you like it. However, once it's done, they're incredibly easy to use. One of the easiest, in fact, of all the cameras. Every time I pick up a Canon or a Nikon, it's actually, for me, it's slightly more tricky. And I'll explain what I mean when I show you this next bit. Okay, so this is what I mean by ease of use. I've got it on manual mode here. So let's have a look at how we change the exposure settings. So let's get this strap out of the way so you can see. Okay. Now, if I want to change shutter speed, I've put it on this dial here, and you can see the shutter speed changes, right, depending on what I want. Okay. Let's put it on 100 for a second. If I want to change aperture, it's this dial over here. Dead easy. Don't even need to do any menu diving or pressing any buttons. If I want to change ISO, I just turn this dial over here. Okay? Usually I leave it on automatic, so it picks its own ISO. If I want some exposure compensation, of course, that would be for like S or A mode, right? But it's this dial up here. I shoot RAW, so I don't need to worry about white balance, but if you wanted white balance, you'd press that on the side here, and then you just pick whichever one that you wanted. And that's it. What more do you want? You can change the ISO at a drop of a hat. You can change the shutter speed, the aperture. Okay, focus point. I've put it on C1 here, so I press this button, okay, and then suddenly I can move this thing around wherever I want. And that's how I generally use the camera. And it's quite easy. You can move that point anywhere on the screen pretty much, right? And it's not hard to move it. Once you're done, you just press this and it will focus on whatever. Yeah, the focusing isn't quite as fast as modern cameras, but you can make decent images from this thing. The other thing are the grid lines. Can you see the grid lines? These are so good to line up things like horizons or make sure diagonals are on point, this kind of thing. And on a DSLR, you just don't have that. So in some ways, it makes shooting easier. And of course, all of this information you can see inside of the screen. And we've even got a little histogram over here. So this is what I'm talking about. You don't need to dive into menus. This is just some kind of myth that a lot of haters have perpetrated through the internet. Okay, so my conclusion about the Sony A7R. I've had it for 4 years now, and I've now replaced it with the A7r Mark III, which does basically improve on every last aspect that this thing falls down on. However, my heart is still drawn to this camera purely because of the aesthetics, the look of it. If you took this to a restaurant and put it down on a table, you wouldn't look like a paparazzi. You'd look like a normal human being who wants to take a picture of his friends. And this is what this camera is about. It gives you a small size so you can take it wherever you want, and it allows you to capture memories. On that note, I want to leave you with some pictures over the last 4 years which I've taken using this camera. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.